Everybody, it's 7 o'clock on the nose. And of course, this is the National Society of Newspaper Columnists. You know that because you're all members, and this webinar is free for you. Yay! Tonight, we are talking everything book publicity in the time of the pandemic and beyond with Laura Rossi. She is book publicist. And so I picked up the wrong paper, so you'll have to apologize. I'll have to apologize. She's a seasoned book publicist with 3 decades in book publishing, owner of her own public relations agency, a published author, and the PR director for the new literary community, A Mighty Blaze, which discusses podcasts, social media, book tours, and how authors can publicize and sell books in a brave new world. And I know Laura because she and I are both in this book, which is Fast Funny Women, edited by Gina Barreca. And you guys all know Gina.
Yeah.
She was our keynote speaker at our New Hampshire conference in 2017. So Laura and I both have an essay in this. And we got to talking and we were like, it's so weird in this pandemic. How do we pass on all the weirdness knowledge to our membership for those of you who have books? So that's where we are starting off today. So Laura, as somebody with 30 years in this whole thing, how did that paint the picture of the switch being flipped last March? Did you go, oh no, what happened?
Oh,
what did you do to help your authors?
Thank you for having me, Bonnie, and thank you to the National Society of Newspaper Columnists. I'm delighted to be here talking to journalists and a fellow author. It's kind of a match made in heaven for me. Bonnie and I were chatting before we came into the webinar about exactly a year ago, we all embarked on this journey with the pandemic. And one of the industries, of course, like every other industry that got hit very hard and everything really got sort of turned upside down, was book publishing. And I was right on the front lines, Bonnie, with many books with pub dates from publishers large and small about to launch. We're talking March pub dates, April, May, and June.
Summer reading season, right?
Summer reading season, you name it. And of course, it wasn't just the pandemic we were dealing with. Our country was going through so much trauma and turmoil, racial unrest. So it really was a time to reflect and a time to, kind of take a look at how we were working. One thing that we all know changed, every tour was canceled. And during that time, there emerged some really terrific online platforms for authors like A Mighty Blaze. Another group is called Friends and Fiction. Smaller groups like First Chapter Reads. I made a list actually of the folks that have lasted all year and are now kind of this burgeoning online event industry. A woman named Robin Call does some events. There is something called The Back Room. And eventually our favorite places, bookstores, figured out how to have virtual events. And so that's where we were a year ago. Fast forward to now, most publishers are not sending authors on the road yet. So we're all really experienced at doing terrific online events. And we had to rethink everything from the media to book tours to pub dates. So it's been exciting for me as a publicist with 30 years in the business because we've had a chance to reinvent how we work. And I think that applies not only to books that are forthcoming, but to the work that all of you do sometimes either daily or weekly as columnists. We're learning how to promote.
As far as that goes, so I think like the pandemic hit, and I'm sure there is a huge population of readers was like, I'm gonna catch up on all those books that I have wanted to read and that sort of thing. And then on the publicist side, you have these new books coming out. So you almost have a ready population who's like, oh, we got the summer to chill at home and read. So the challenge becomes, how do you get to those people when it's not, when you're not meeting them in the usual places like Barnes and Noble and
That's
things
right,
like
Bonnie.
that.
That's right. And that is still our reality. This will have a long tail of change before we go back to kind of what we call the normal, whether it means bookstore tours or in-person conferences. So what originally happened was the space got very crowded with everyone kind of scrambling. And it was a time where folks were looking at the novelty of having the ability to read. And so that was great. Book sales have been, if you follow statistics at all, they've been up and down a bit, but we've seen a real surge in audiobooks and ebooks. And again, that makes sense with people on budgets wanting to buy books or borrow from their library. So the publishing world and the book world feels a little bit more like it's on solid footing in that respect. But you're right. How do people hear about books? How do people find their readers if they're an author? And if you're, trying to navigate this brave new world, what do you do? Well, one thing that authors need to do, and again, columnists, some of this we can sort of interchange, is, you sort of need to look local first. So one of the things that I tell all of my authors and clients and friends that are authors, or again, writers or columnists, is, what's happening in your local community? If you have a book coming out, can you talk to your local library and ask them to order and purchase a copy? That actually makes a huge difference to any size publisher. And a lot of times the request from the author will result in not only an order of the real book, but maybe multiple orders of an ebook. So that's a great way to get started. If you're not already writing for a local paper, now is the time to maybe reach out. And again, not everyone has a budget to hire a publicist like me, or some folks don't have publishing companies that have publicists. Depends on kind of, what your specific arrangement is around your book, but talk to your local community newspaper, talk to the book person at, the larger paper that covers your area and your town, and really just start networking at a local level. And that's something, even if we can't do it in person, you could pick up the phone or send an email, and that starts to build a community.
I'm going to jump in here because, with this book coming out, I did those two very things, and I want to share my experiences with that with people.
Thank you.
So I reached out to the local library, and I also have my cousin who is like in my back pocket. I love her. She reached out to her county library. So we're in neighboring counties, and
love it.
So we both reached out. I got radio silence. I didn't get a response, email, nothing. She went through like the system,
Wow.
like she was going to request a book. But here locally with everybody else in the pandemic, the library shut down and they lowered their staff. And so it was nuts. But I tell you, she sent me a screenshot 2 days ago that told me that Fast Funny Women was ready for her to pick up.
That's great. Bravo. And that is, again, it's sort of grassroots. In some ways, we've all had to go back to kind of this hyper local way of publicizing and promoting. And so, to kind of further talk about the example of Fast Funny Women, some interesting stuff that it's going to reflect on the times. Our pub date was originally in the fall. Mm-hmm. And collectively, as the publicist on the book and a contributor, and working with our publisher and the author, and also talking to all of you all as our contributors, we decided that things were still so unstable in the book industry that it would be better to publish the book in March of 2021, because the events weren't booking. There wasn't a notion as to whether or not we'd be far enough into kind of recovering from the pandemic that, we would even be able to publicize the book, get reviews. All of that shut down when the pandemic started. So that means, if you want to rewind a bit, I wasn't able to go out to any newspaper editor that wanted news stories to pitch nonfiction or fiction, because rightly so, it was COVID-19 24/7. And then that turned right into, so many tragedies around our country, and, culminating in kind of George Floyd and how our summer went. And then if you sprinkle in some politics, there wasn't that normal route to publicize books. So I was encouraging all of our contributors to talk to their own local libraries. And then I immediately dove in, this may be jumping around to different questions, but to researching really specialized podcasts. And
jump in real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but before we move on past newspapers, I want to say that I jumped in because I'm on the editorial board for the Cincinnati Enquirer. So you'd think I'd be a shoo-in, right? Oh, I write an op-ed and it runs, right? No, that's not necessarily true, because I did write an op-ed and I did send it to them. They didn't run it. They felt that it was too self-promotional. And
interesting.
I totally could. I could see that.
Like conflict of interest, Bonnie, a little bit.
Honestly, I didn't get the feedback that I had hoped to get. People were busy, whatever, and I just got to basically, we'll pass on this, and actually just not responsive. Wow. So I ended up taking the piece to. I'm like, what do what do Gina and I have in common? And that's the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop. That's where we met. So I sent it to Terry there, and she ran it on their blog. And that was fine. It was printed and published, and I was able to share it and disperse it to the people that noted. But I think it's a really fine balance and a tricky balance if you are going to write it yourself as an op-ed, as a columnist. That's what we're used to doing. So
I'm glad you jumped in. I'm glad you jumped in, because I'm going to actually, before we move on, one thing, as I was just thinking about our audience tonight, and again, you all may be writing columns and writing books. So thinking about that intersection is really crucial when it comes to publicity, because part of your work is to publicize your writing and your columns, right? And again, there is sometimes that conflict of interest or too promotional. But one thing that is often untapped by my most skilled writers and authors and folks that are columnists is you can look at some of what I kind of call the industry publications, and most of them will be jumping over their laptop and their ring lights to say yes to a piece that, yes, it may have some promotional elements to it, but you are a seasoned journalist with an incredible resume. So I jotted down, again, just prepping for tonight, a couple of names. So the reach of these places goes far beyond the trades. So we know the trades are like Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Kirkus, and Book Page. They review the early editions of books. But these are more kind of industry pubs. So Writer's Digest, Poets and Writers, and then a couple of newer ones. One is called careerauthors.com. And then the other is Writer Unboxed, which is, I think, all fiction. But these places are, staffed by smart editors, a writerly community, a book buying community, and they are looking for content about the writing process and about your new book. And they will barely edit it. If you are in the newspaper society, column society, they're not going to edit you. They will just say, okay, when do you want us to run it? I guarantee it. And you can pitch that yourself. You don't need a Laura Rossi publicist doing that for you.
But Gina Barreca, she did a piece in Writer's Digest for Fast Finding Women, and talk about how for that kind of piece, how she framed it for their readers to be.
I would love to.
Okay,
would love to.
So this is frame that to be appropriate.
This is the perfect example of kind of pulling back the curtain, a la Wizard of Oz. So I am the person kind of behind Gina, getting that piece in Writer's Digest, and it is not an impossible task for any of you here tonight to contact the editor. You just go on their masthead, you'll see who the editor and the managing editor are, and cold call is now called cold email in my business. So I know one of the editors, but again, if they're getting an email from any of you all that are here tonight, you will get a response immediately. It's not just like a random spam situation. They will perk up to see your name because they love running columnists and published authors. And I said, listen, with the PR hat on, as well as being a contributor, this book is coming out. Gina has never published anything in Writer's Digest or, on their online piece. And she is pioneering this, like we can maybe call it a trend, but flash nonfiction. We have found, as people in the book publishing industry, that these smaller kind of appetizer portions of reading have also been, sort of driven up in terms of sales, like an anthology or a collection, because at the beginning of the pandemic, with the stress and trauma, not a doctor, but, a lot of people, me included, were not able to read long form books. I had to kind of dip in and out of chapters or short stories. Then I went into kind of a nonfiction phase, and then eventually came back to fiction. So I approached the editor and I said, what can we do around this that blends Gina's incredible publishing career with this new trend that makes it relate to your reading community right now? And so we had a fun sort of back and forth creatively. And he said, how about, sort of these tips and tricks about nonfiction, flash nonfiction, anything sort of in that bucket that she feels like she wants to write about. So Gina and I went back and forth, and then I was really kind of policing it in terms of, let's get it in by this date so it can run around the pub date. So that just comes from me being in this chair for 30 years, knowing if this runs around the March 2nd pub date, it will help with that building of her digital footprint for the book. And then everyone starts sharing it. The editor was thrilled, lots of feedback, Gina got it, I got it, they got it, and now she may get to write for them again. But that is really like a little part of my secret sauce, which is when you're establishing yourself as a writer about your writing process, that has such great built-in publicity because you are networking to other writers and people that buy books. And again, it's all about, at the end of the day, I mean, if you write, you want to get read, whether it's a column or a book. So I would say swap out book. And, Bonnie, I know you have your new incredible column with creators, and I'm making you blush, but
I'm so excited.
Like,
I think I can finally talk about it without crying, though. So I think we're okay.
I don't mind crying. We're in a pandemic still. So, but for anyone here tonight, and Bonnie can find a way for you to get in touch with me if you want to ask a specific question. But many of these places, would be delighted to run something about either your column process or fiction, nonfiction, poetry. These places are really thriving communities. And I know Writers Digest, I think they have like 6 figures of real followers, like 250,000 K on Twitter.
Yeah.
So
and
these are the places.
Writers and readers.
And book buyers.
And
they really, really are. And the other piece that sort of goes to you mentioning the op-ed column is a lot of the publishing houses are really pushing authors to, get this piece out about your writing. But honestly, if you're a little bit sort of over here, as long as your byline mentions the book, and if it's digital, if they will include a clickable link, that's enough. And I say that with 100% confidence as a publicist. I have placed slightly off-topic pieces for some of my authors, and for example, Daily Beast. Well, guess what? Just because we have that live link saying, Bonnie's book was published on March 2nd, 2021, it just connects the dots. And there you go. That's considered book publicity. And that's how things have changed, I would say drastically in the last year, which may allow us to do you want to talk about reviews a little bit? Is that kind of the next?
Yes, we did the whole, and for those of you who don't remember or did not participate on the NSNC YouTube channel, I'll put it in the chat. We did talk to Pamela Paul and Tony Norman, both book review editors, New York Times, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, specifically about book reviews. So there's an hour conversation there if you missed it.
Excellent. I think everyone here tonight should watch that, maybe not after ours, but if you have an hour, it's worth every word. It's really gold. But the short sort of segue to that topic is reviews are important, but the space and place for reviews in traditional publications, I'm not telling you all anything you don't know, that the book review sections have shrunk. So many people and journalists and incredible columnists have lost their jobs, book critics. I mean, I go back 30 years, so I know people that have had their whole careers at certain papers and now they've been furloughed or, permanently they've had to take a package. So what I will say is reviews are great, but right now, because we're in the pandemic, for whatever reason, if you don't get a lot of reviews, these other ways of publicizing your book and your writing and your column are reaching readers. I think we're all smarter digital users now. And I think the content we're all looking at is curated. So if you're going into the right places where there are folks interested in reading and writing, sure, a great review in the New York Times book review, that tops everything. But a small write-up in a local paper also has legs. Because guess what? As Bonnie has showed us with her embracing of things from TikTok to Twitter to YouTube, you can turn that small review into something that has a lot more reach by creating a quick graphic or reposting a link, putting some good hashtags on there, just getting us into the social media part of our chat. But I'm going to let Bonnie lead us into the next topic.
Well, I think we should talk about podcast tours, because I've heard some rumors back and forth that they're a waste of time. Do they really turn into book sales? How does it work? So talk to me a little bit about those podcast tours. Are they really worth your time and effort?
So here's what I have to say about podcasts. And in my sort of other life, I am a podcast producer. I produce a parenting podcast. I'll say the name if anyone's a parent. It's called the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. And we've been around for a number of years. We do a lot of books and authors on our show, kind of in the parenting space. But I am going to raise my hand and say, you know, honest truth, that I think some books are sold, but it's not a huge needle mover. Podcasts, I think cumulatively will sell books, but you have to be willing to know that that show, even if it has a decent audience, your hour on that podcast may only sell 1 or 2 books. Now, again, like these reviews we're mentioning that maybe aren't New York Times level, you will have an archived audio interview that you can use to get other media and use on your own media and your own website. So here's what I have to say about podcasts. No grand and beautiful database exists for podcasts. So Publicist, we use, you know, there are various companies, and we work with these expensive databases that are updated all the time in real time. I can find any editor, any host, any producer, except for this large unknown world of podcasts. They're really, someone's putting one together, but it doesn't exist. So all of us are kind of hunting and pecking at our keyboards and researching podcasts a number of ways. So you can look at the charts on Apple, for example. You can download a free, it's like a piece of software almost called Chartable, and you can look at how certain podcasts are charting. And my advice is pick a half a dozen, book yourself on them in a condensed period of time. So if you're doing this around a book, try to book those 6 podcasts during your publication week. And then with whatever tools you have on your own and through your publisher, through your Amazon page, just see if you're seeing the numbers change. You know, are you selling books? If you're going to get a sense of whether or not it feels like it's working. Even if you don't have access to analytics or sales figures from places like BookScan or Ingram, if you're with a smaller publisher, you can at least look at how your Amazon numbers are. I would not, and I underline that, I would not pay anyone to put together a podcast tour for you. There are a lot of services sort of popping up as almost like these sort of pieces of what I would call a robust publicity campaign. Do not put $1 down on anyone that approaches you saying, I'll put together a podcast tour for you and you'll sell a bunch of books. That's a no-go. You can do it on your own. You could hire someone. If you're in academia, it might be like an intern project. You know, I know Gina Barreca has folks that work in her office that do some editorial assistant work as almost like an internship or a co-op. That's a great way to kind of figure out, you know, this category of newer media. So I love podcasts. I produce one. I think they are the future in terms of news dissemination and how we used to view local radio programs, you know, local talk radio. When I first started publishing, I mean, that was at least 50% of my PR campaigns for authors on tour. We would have 5 or 6 radio stations in every city an author went to. And I'm talking, you know, Cincinnati, Minneapolis, the coast, whatever city our authors were going to would be sort of paired with a great bookstore event, half a dozen radio, maybe a morning show. And, you know, again, in the old days, book editors and book columnists or featured writers were able to come and do an in-person interview. So that's the podcast thing. But what I would say is kind of the, not maybe the stepsister, maybe like the twin sister, fraternal twins, is the blogger, book influencer, and book blogger tours. Those are worth considering. There are some places that do a terrific job. And what that is you can pay
a book influencer. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So, okay.
What is a book influencer?
Right. So a book influencer is someone who essentially has carved out an identity, usually first on Instagram, and they call themselves bookstagrammers. Okay. And they are kind of the know-it-alls about the new books that are coming. These are the feeds that you might catch a glimpse of where there's sort of a beautiful, very curated photo of a book cover with like a cup of coffee and, you know, or a little quote, or you're seeing them on YouTube and they're doing live shows talking about their last book mail haul where they got a bunch of galleys and advanced books. So I hate to say it, Bonnie, but it's sort of like, you know, people that love fashion or that love cooking. It's the book people. So they're all influencers. And
so how do you get their attention? Do you just use the hashtag
Well, so
or
there's a
how many
couple of
years?
ways. There's a couple of ways. That's kind of the, if you have a lot of time on your hands way, but there are some small companies, and I can try to do an addendum to our handout that you're
That'd be
giving
great.
everyone to give a few names. So there are a few trustworthy organizers where you may have to pay $50 to $75 or $100.
Well, that's not bad.
Well worth it.
Oh yeah, that's not bad.
And these men and women, book lovers from head to toe,
Mhm.
they have created an online, almost like a listserv or like a community where they might have 20 to 30 great book bloggers that have a website for their blog, and then they have active profiles on Facebook, Twitter, and totally all over Instagram, because that's kind of the place right now where this is happening the most, is Instagram. And what they do is you work with them, usually around your pub date, and you do a book blog or a Bookstagram tour. And what that means is every day, for however much your budget is, between 1 and 3 posts about your book will go live during pub week or the following week. And believe it or not, the collective sort of cumulativeness of these images and hashtags and buy links, a lot of time are then put in the bios on Instagram of the bloggers. You can see movement on Amazon. You can see sometimes regular media requests will come into your DM. Hey, I saw your book and I write for this local paper. I write for this website. I'd like to get a review copy. That's worth it. And I would be happy to recommend a few names of trustworthy places, but they are also all using the Bookstagram or Bookstagrammer hashtag. So that's Instagram only, obviously.
Sure.
Tell by the
Talk to
name.
me about live events, because you and I both did live interviews with the publisher for Fast Funny Women. It was a lunchtime thing. And what do those live events do for you? And is it worth doing those conversations on social media?
It's a great question. And I love the fact that now there is a community of people that are able to attend book events, talks, webinars, lunchtime chats, or what we're doing tonight, organizations that are having guest speakers. It is now kind of a standard offering. Absolutely 100%, yes, do these. If it's a library, if it's a lunchtime talk, which is what Bonnie and I both did with the publisher, Woodhall Press, but you can also do them with your local bookstore or bookstores across the country. And the best way to set those events up are very clear. Give the store about 3 months, because they really are working on their calendars that far in advance. If you have a couple of dates in mind, again, a simple email, usually all the websites of the bookstores, or as you mentioned, local libraries, but even libraries across the country, they usually have an event person or a manager email address, and you just explain you have a book coming out, you'd love to do an event. The new requirement that I'm encountering now is exactly how you and I are doing our event tonight is now the preferred way to schedule yourself an event. They'd like you to be in conversation with someone, but you don't have to even invite another published author. You could invite a friend who's a journalist and you're talking about your book. So in conversation, or you could present it as, Laura Rossi interviewing Bonnie about her new creators column. Most of the stores will say, listen, if you can bring 2 great speakers that will be on camera, engage with our listeners and our, audience, we're in. I mean, it's really, and it is usually free. Sometimes there's a small fee depending on, again, the venue, but most of them are free. And these are great ways to sell books. Yes, because
I have a question there. So sorry, I don't mean to
no,
jump
go
in,
for
but-
it. Well, I know we have limited time, so
Right. So that advice is great. And that's exactly what I did for Cincinnati here. We have the Mercantile Library, which is one of the only 12 membership libraries left in the country, which
wow.
I sure has a weird history that I need to learn.
Yeah, I love libraries.
But they're a membership library. So it's, and they were doing these literary evenings throughout the pandemic.
Okay.
And then I reached out to them to set up this event with about Fast Funny Women,
right, with Gina,
and conversation with whomever there, and they were all about it. But then all of a sudden, I called her today actually, and we got it set up for June. But she had originally said April, and then she's like, she really put the brakes on because she said her last two events, and I'm being completely transparent here with our membership here.
You should, yeah.
She told me, she goes, the last few events have really bad turnout because
Okay.
she was worried about Zoom fatigue. So they were starting to spread out their literary events and not do them weekly, but now they're just doing like a couple a month. And so she's ended up scheduling me all the way out to June 10th, which I'm glad I'm still on the calendar, and in June we're
Right.
still on books. But are you seeing that as a publicist? Are people starting to say it's springtime, people are getting vaccinated, people are going outside, and the Zoom breaks are being put on?
I do think that each venue, particularly, when we're talking about non-bookstores, they have a sense now of what's working for them. Okay. So whether it's the 92nd Street Y in New York or your library group locally, they do have a sense of the rhythm of attendance. And, nobody wants to sort of come and talk to two people. I mean, even if you can't see them, you want to feel like your guests are talking to an audience. And, even if it's recorded, it's not optimal. And so I am sort of trusting the people running the events. What is a giant question mark is exactly what you just mentioned. People are getting vaccinated. The weather's changing all over the country for those of us, in the colder parts. We're finally, I have shirt sleeves on. I'm in New England, in Rhode Island, but I'm watching it with close eyes to see, what is the summer going to be like? Because last summer, people were doing events 7 days a week, Bonnie, and they were getting turnout. Right. This summer, people want to be outside and socializing if they can, and if they can safely. So my prediction is we'll go through kind of a normal spring with these virtual events. Summer may be lighter for everyone across everything. I'm talking music, books, anything that was being consumed virtually. I think there'll be a little bit of a hiatus, but I think once we get back to the fall, not so much because of COVID, but because this hybrid model has worked really well for overhead costs for places like libraries and bookstores where there are no budgets, right. Even nonprofit groups. Everyone that I'm kind of polling, I'm always doing sort of Laura market research because I love learning new things. And I'm hearing from most of the bookstores that they would like to keep a version of hybrid offering year round. Yeah. Now, talk to me next year at this time. Let's see where we are with that. But libraries as well, because, they're, again, bringing more people into their patronage, especially if you're bringing in local folks. Then when it comes time for fundraising, you're sort of feeling that connection again. And as we talk about just one more sort of bit about events, which is the other place that has kind of turned up the volume are alumni organizations. So for fast, funny women, I went to UConn. Gina is a professor at UConn. And I have never been as wowed by an alumni kind of support system for the book. That's and I think this is because they have figured out how to do a flawless event online that goes out to the whole community with sort of focus groups. So this, went out to alumni, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. They have it down to a science now, the alumni offices and the foundation. So I reached out as the publicist on the book, as well as a contributor and a UConn alum. And I said, what can we do? Gina's had other books. I've been part of them or helped publicize them. They featured us in the Alumni magazine, which sort of seeded everything. And that was a 2-page spread on Gina in the book. And then, Bonnie, they've sort of passed me over to the alumni folks. And we created a virtual online event that was open to alumni. It was free. We were able to kind of have a private toast with all the contributors first. And then we went and did the same Zoom webinar format. And then they allowed us to post links to bookshop.org, which is, supports indie bookstores, a couple of local indie stores, and then places to get the book through UConn. And we had, our registration was 400 people for the online event, which they said is the high. We broke all the records of any online event they'd ever had. So I do think that, and they're thinking of starting a permanent book club now. And I sort of duplicated this for other authors. And
so cool.
It's really amazing.
That and alumni, I would have never thought alumni organizations. That's amazing. And I just had a total flashback that this book is not the first time I've interacted with you. I reached out to you for
oh my gosh.
I introduced Gina at the Irma Bombeck conference in 2016 when my son was just born, and I got a T-shirt made of "If You Lean In," and I had to email you.
Yes, and I see your
permission
dress.
to use it and surprise Gina, and I wore that T-shirt all weekend. That's
Okay.
hilarious.
So we're, you know,
we're old
we have
friends.
a past,
We didn't
Bonnie.
know it.
We are. Everyone watching, Bonnie and I haven't met yet, but we feel like we're old, fast. We were fast, funny friends from the minute we connected, and now we connected even before we knew it. So,
That's
anyone thinking about book stuff, go back to your alumni organizations. I don't care if it's 50 years, 60 years. They are really, the pump has been primed, and the community piece is something that, you know, that word is tossed around a lot. And I'm going to tell you, from being kind of on the front lines of this pandemic as a book publicist, it is the driver of everything we've done. So every bookstore, every library, every alumni event, even though we're on screens, people have been able to attend from all over and find connection, then have something to take away, a book, you know, whether it's on their Kindle or from their library. And that's different. I just feel like the connection, the deep connection that we have with words, as people that love books and do it in some way, shape, or form, or writing as a living, like, our people are out there. So I'm delighted, and I hope everything stays with this hybrid model in some fashion.
I think it's a great opportunity. I know that the NSNC, you talk about overhead and things like that. The rock stars that we have been able to interview over this winter has been amazing. There's no hotel, there's no airfare, there's none of that to deal with, and it show up and everybody gets FaceTime with Pulitzer Prize.
Isn't it thrilling? I mean, isn't it thrilling? I feel the same way. You know, a year into this pandemic, I am still, like, most nights of the week, walking around with my phone and one ear thing in, because there's so many good events. There's so many author events. You know, my husband says, you're doing this all day, and then you have events that you attend virtually for your clients. What are you doing the other time? And I'm thinking, I am seeing the authors that I couldn't see when they were touring because they didn't come to my state. So again, maybe because there's something about the magic of books and words and writing that this, like, I don't mind some of this being at home a lot, because I'm totally satisfied with attending events, learning about new books, reading. So
Connie Schultz, we interviewed her. Her daughter's The Veery Town book came out last year, and she talked to us. She came, I mean, and she's a columnist, and she loves the NSNC.
She's incredible. I can't believe the people you've gotten, Bonnie.
I mean, Suzette got to interview her, and that was just amazing.
Wow.
So
you're all amazing. I thank you for writing columns and being newspaper journalists, because you know, it's just nothing beats, you know, having a paper in your hand. And now, you know, we're all doing a lot of that digitally, but
a lot of scrolling. So tell us, for our columnists here, we had the question from Dave Jaffe come in earlier that I forwarded to you about those who did launch books in 2020, and now is it worth a relaunch or a book launch 2.0, or how are you handling that with the people that went, oh crikey, I tried to launch a book in a pandemic? So
ouch. I feel your pain, Dave. Thank you for your question. It's a great question, and I'm going to answer it in a different way than I would have the last 29-ish years, which is, it is worth trying to give your book another launch, another push. I will tell you, and I mentioned this to Bonnie earlier, you're not going to get reviews a year later. So just, that's gone. If your book came out in April 2020, do not try to get someone to review your book. He did win awards
last year. I want to say that I know that Dave's book did win awards. So I don't know how to incorporate that into your
So put that in your outreach or in your press release. You kind of update whatever materials you have for when the book was originally launched. But what you can do now is go back out there, forget about expiration dates, you forget about the old rules of your book's only valid for those 3 months around pub date. That only really applies to reviews. The reason I say reviews are so hard to get is, unless you have a connection, you are competing with all the new books coming out right now. Many of them are still sort of spill over from pub dates that changed all throughout 2020, and books got moved and moved. Then they got moved again when big books were announced last minute, like Obama's book. A bunch of people got bumped into, spring of 2021. If there was something that crashed a list that was going to be a bestseller, other books got moved. So don't try to, get a book review. What you can do is some of what we were talking about earlier, explore a handful of podcasts, see if you can find ones that really speak to the topic of your book, maybe have good social media platforms. Definitely go back to my earlier suggestion of looking at some of these places like Writer's Digest, or offering an essay to the Daily Beast, parade.com, Reader's Digest. All of these places, their staff is reduced. They do have regular freelancers, but as a newspaper columnist, you have basically the resume and the portfolio to go to some of these editors and offer an essay or even a short excerpt from your book. And what you were doing to pitch it when it was originally hitting the bookstore shelves, just go back and do it now, all over as if it wasn't done before. And normally when authors come to me, Bonnie, and they say, my book came out last March and I want to hire you for more publicity. There's no paperback. So a lot of times the book comes out in hardcover if you're with one of the top, large 5 publishers in New York. A year later, your paperback comes out. So most authors didn't get a paperback coming out this year because they didn't have the hardcover sales to support it. So many authors are now looking at, they had nothing happen with their book last spring. Should they do something now? And I have said yes to all of them. I'm not even to hire me, but just getting advice from me that we can go back out with the topic of your book and try to pitch some of that media. So broadcast, podcast, some of the paid places like Sirius XM radio, and do interviews on the topics that you were going to do them last spring and summer. It didn't happen. So you're not repeating content. You're not oversaturated in the media. I'm working with a professor, and she has a book about the experience of summer camp. Well, there was no summer camp last year at all, anywhere. So we're going back out, and I just got her 3 great interviews in the DC area because anyone that even wanted to cover her book last year couldn't do it. Or if they had even a canned recorded interview, it never ran, and now it's old. So you have like this once in a lifetime opportunity as authors to go back out and pitch your book as if it were brand new now. And I would say, if you can hire someone to do it, great. If you sort of go back with a smile and a little, sugar and ask your publisher, can you just do one more wave? If your book's timely and it's really tied to something topical like summer camp, again, these are secrets I'm spilling, but some of the publishers are kind of saying, we would never do this in the past, but we will now because everything for, this author was canceled and nothing happened and it was too late to stop publication.
Well,
so yes.
Talk to me about excerpts for a minute, because I've been trying to take my chapter of Fast Finding Women and place it as an excerpt to try and help book publicity. I'm getting nowhere. Now, my particular chapter is it's about hunting with my husband. So it's very fall.
It's a great chapter.
Winter.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
But
I love it.
Yeah, but I'm hitting the wall. I'm like, am I doing something wrong? But I've gone to all of the flash, like the brevities. I've gone to anybody accepting essays. I've tried anybody who does book reviews. Do they print excerpts? And I'm hitting the wall. So what's going on there?
So a couple of things. So some places don't take excerpts. So make sure you've kind of done your homework to see if you've seen them run in those places, which you are a journalist, so I'm sure you have. Some places see an offer of an excerpt and they just assume you want to charge them a fee for that, because a lot of excerpts, publishers will say it's going to be this amount of money, this is the length, it's sort of by word. Now, I know for a fact with Woodhull Press, because I was also trying to shop them around, that they will allow an excerpt to run as long as they run the credit line, from the publisher. Yeah. I usually open up my offers for an excerpt with, this would be a free of charge excerpt. Okay. Because again, I think some of those may end up just getting tossed to trash. Okay. If someone's doing that 10-second look at the top of your email. Yeah. Most of the mid-sized to large publishers actually have sub-rights departments that sell excerpts and first serials. So you may just have been dismissed because of just that's kind of the nature of the business, and you didn't realize, oh my gosh, people might think I'm trying to make a buck, which you're not. You're literally giving a free, awesome chapter in exchange for the credit line and maybe a live link to buy the book. So that's number one.
Okay.
Number two is so your piece is about hunting. So did you look at places like Garden and Gun and like some of these sort of fun websites?
Right. My husband, he subscribes to bow hunting magazine and things like that. And I probably should do that. So if the book came out in the spring, is it too late this fall?
I'm going to say if you pitch it now and then just tell them they can run it whenever they want, it's not too late. Okay. If you wait to the fall to pitch it, that would be too late. Okay. The other thing, and I'm going to probably say the wrong name, there is a website, and I think it's called submit.ly.
Okay.
Now, for everyone listening, if you Google that now and it comes up incorrectly, Bonnie and I are going to add this to our handout. It's either Submitly or Submittably. It's one of those names, and it is a ticker tape of places that will take original essays, excerpts, and writing. Now, some of it is one reader, in someone's basement. So it's not like all the Wall Street Journal or the Cincinnati Enquirer, but some are places that are, really kind of not like Maria Shriver, but, those kind of digital properties where it might be under like the hub of a name, like a Maria Shriver or, Katie Couric's newsletter. They post in those places similarly to, are you familiar with Help a Reporter Out, the Harrow service?
No.
It's where like writers will say, I need a source to talk about lipstick. Do you work for a makeup company? So it's kind of a journalist thing. So Submittably or Submittable, again, we'll correct what this is called.
Yeah, Submittable is usually, that's an essay. That's usually in a literary magazine call out.
Okay, so I'm going to get the right name for you all. But, and so there are places like that. And sometimes you will see on those ticker tapes, places that you might almost dismiss, but go back and look at them, like Scary Mommy. She Knows. So, like upon first glance, you might think, is this really the right place? But some of them have verticals, and some of those verticals, it really could fit with your piece. So I'm about to do the same thing with my piece. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet. So my piece is called the Podcast Diaries. It's all about,
awesome.
So I won't spoil it in case anyone wants.
I won't spoiler alert.
Buy the book.
Yeah.
But I have been thinking way outside the box because, again, I'm not a columnist or, a really well-known writer name, but I'm thinking places that write about podcasts and people that love podcasts and people that love true crime. So I'm kind of going after those people. I'm taking like a little kind of detour. I'm also going to talk to some audio places. Yeah. So like places that run audiobooks. Like there's a website called Libro. So if you have an audiobook, which we do for our book, they sometimes run excerpts on their website. So even though I might be offering to place my chapter on an audiobook website, it's still kind of in that big bucket of publicity.
Right on. We have quite a few questions here, so
let's do it. Okay? I could talk forever, Bonnie. So I'd love to hear some questions. Get me going on what I love.
Cut you off, but I want to make sure that people are heard.
No.
So first up, we have Bill Timaeus, and he has authored or co-authored 7 books. His most recent, he put the link, is actually, I know it's about a family member who was lost in 9/11, and this is the anniversary of the 20th anniversary coming up. So he writes, I've never had an agent or a publicist. What should someone like him hire someone? Why should someone like him hire someone like you? And I don't know if this is, no, he has a publisher. It's a small, Bill put in the chat. I believe you have a,
should I look at this?
This is a,
let's see.
This is through a publisher, if I'm correct.
I'm looking for Bill. Yeah, I'm not seeing it, but it is submittable, I think.
Q&A, but they, and talk about the difference between small publishers versus big publishers. People assume that, the Penguin's gonna have all my publicity handled for me, so I don't need to do anything. Is that a myth? Is that true? And then smaller publishers, you're gonna have to hit the streets yourself.
You probably, yeah, Bonnie, you sort of got it. Although even the larger publishers now, I think the resources are limited. So depending on where your book is on their list, if you're sort of a mid-list author and buried, does Bill have a publisher?
He does. He has a publisher. It's Front Edge Publishing. It sounds like it's going to be as a smaller indie publisher. Yeah.
Okay. So, is it regional, Bill? Is it in the kind of New York area, or I'm just curious. I don't know if,
we'll type it in here.
Okay. So if Bill is in the kind of the New York area and his publisher is local and regional, they're going to be probably networked to some degree to some of the local media. Okay. So again, I'm from the tri-state area. I lived in New York City for a long time. So, the Daily News, Good Day New York, all of those places, obviously the whole country will, but those places are going to be doing a lot, for this painful anniversary. And so in that case, small publisher, I would sort of press them to see if they could do anything extra, even as a small publisher, to make more books available to you for free to mail out, to maybe do a few email campaigns for you to national media, just getting the book on their radar. The other thing that I would ask about is this book out yet, or is it coming out? If it's not out yet, you could look into something called NetGalley, which a lot of the publishers do. I know you probably know about NetGalley, Bonnie, but it's essentially an e-galley or an electronic version of your corrected manuscript before it becomes a book. And what that means is these small publishers don't have a big budget to produce a lot of books for review mailing, but journalists can request through NetGalley. So he needs to announce the book starting this summer to any kind of media that might be doing roundups about books and the anniversary. Yeah. If he's got time, he could do it himself. He doesn't have to sort of dump money into a publicist because, this is going to be the news. This is going to be the headlines.
Detroit area publisher, and it was released January 19th.
This past January.
Yes.
Okay, so what I would say, Bill, is, I would, if you have the time, I would sort of do a one-page press release that really highlights this book for the 20th anniversary. And I would try to mail out to kind of the top producers in the New York area at the morning shows, and some of the newspapers like Daily News, the New York Post, New York Times, Washington Post, and just politely ask to have it be on their radar, if they're doing roundups or coverage of people that are related to the victims, because that's real storytelling. And, it's not an outside person writing about the anniversary. And again, never say never. I mean, this is the kind of thing where you have a direct connection to something that affected our whole country. So I would say start with that and see where you end up.
Right on. Okay, so we have John Branning here. He says, Laura, do you have any tweaks or additional recommendations regarding gaining traction for self-published books? As self-published author, I've utilized many of the recommendations you've offered, but have experienced some backlash or at least lack of interest when trying to get the word out about my latest opus.
Yes, I do. And I do occasionally work with self-published authors. And I feel like they are the hardest working authors out there. I mean, yes, every author, their book is their baby and blood, sweat, and tears go into it. Self-published authors are still having to overcome the stigma of being a self-published author. And so I would say for all you've done, you may have to do 2 or 3 more rounds of some of the same work. But I would add to anything you're doing for publicity, more events. So what I mean by that is keep trying to do bookstore events, keep trying to really saturate where you live. So go 2 and 3 towns over and see if those bookstores will carry your book or those libraries will carry your book. And then get online and play around on Facebook. And depending on whether or not it's fiction or nonfiction, join, if you haven't, some of these really great groups. So there's a group called Great Books, Great Readers. There is another group called Tall Poppy Writers. There are various online book clubs. Get into those groups. Many of them welcome self-published authors. There are other ones that are like, again, they're very genre driven. So you might find thriller ones. There's one called Women's Writers. You literally can just go into the search bar on Facebook and put in, book clubs, book groups, and then you type of your book. Get into those spaces because you may find that community starts buying your book and supporting your writing. And I've never seen self-published authors rejected in those spaces. And then, you never know. You never know what's going to sort of happen with those connections.
Okay. We have 5 questions left, so this is the lightning round.
Okay.
Woo! Okay, here we go. So Elaine Pearson, you had mentioned untapped industry publications, and she didn't get them all. We could probably send them out in an email, but you had said Writer's Digest, Poets and Writers, careerauthors.com, and what was the other one? We couldn't quite figure it out.
Writer Unboxed.
Writer Unboxed. There we go. All right. So the next one is Suzette Standring. She has 2 writing books that were published a while ago, but still relevant. Is your advice more for brand new books, or can it be applied to rejuvenating interest?
Can definitely apply to rejuvenated interest. And if these books are already published and in print and don't have the opportunity to do a new introduction or forward, then what I would suggest is write a new introduction or forward and try to reach out to one of these writing places and say, basically, I'm doing an update. It's not in the book. Would you allow me to kind of run this new forward and introduction 10 years later? Here's how some of my advice applies, and here's some new stuff, and offered almost like an exclusive.
Right on. Okay, Amy Abbott, she is asking, can self-published books get reviews? How hard is that?
It's really hard. It's almost impossible. And I'm saying that because books from Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, you name it, people with 20 books behind them, and I can't get them reviews sometimes. That's because it's super competitive. There's so many books, not a lot of review coverage space anymore. Columns have disappeared. It's very sad. So when I hear reviews now, I also think about get people to review your book on Goodreads, get people to do reviews on Amazon, even though we don't like to put money into the monster box store things all the time. Those reviews basically work with algorithms. The more reviews that are better, the more your book is seen, even if it's self-published, it's more discoverable on some of these larger like Amazon type sites. So those are reviews too.
I know Amy, she's awesome. And I want to tell you, talk to Curtis Honeycutt, who is the grammar guy. He self-published his book and he just got a review from Publishers Weekly. Talk to him about how
actually,
he did that.
I can tell you that.
Okay.
Okay. Publishers Weekly has a paid for service. For a small fee, any self-published author can apply and have their book reviewed by Publishers Weekly. If you go onto publishersweekly.com, you'll see like a little thing. I think it's called like Book Life is the subset. Yeah. Very respected. That counts. The other place that I think Kirkus also has a new service, Kirkus Reviews, which is one of the trades that we really depend on in publishing. They now offer a paid for service as well.
Right on.
Very respected. And sometimes those two things in hand can get another review for you somewhere else. Like the Midwest Book Review, they do a bunch of book reviews. It's called the Midwest Book Review. And they don't always have to be a published book. They can be self-published. Awesome. So yes, check those out if you have a budget,
Wonderful. And this is our final question of the night. And this is Jamie Fisher, who is actually our NSNC intern this semester.
Hi,
and she's the one that I was trying to remember. How many books have you read so far this year, Jamie? You got to tell me in the chat or how many you read last year. It's impressive what this woman reads. And her question
is, 75. All right, Jamie needs to start a Bookstagram account because she's an influencer already.
You are, totally. Absolutely.
That's kind of how it starts. It's just, or get on, do some book talks with Bonnie. That's the new thing from the New York Times this weekend, book talk.
Right on.
That's the hashtag.
Good deal.
All right, last question.
Her question is, for a brand new author, when publicizing, would you suggest a hybrid model of publicizing, or would you publicize on social media more than other forums? Or what would your process be in these days versus years before for a brand new author?
So for a brand new author, I would follow kind of the traditional training I've gotten, which is we're going to go after regular book reviews, mail out galleys if we can, or do e-galleys. I work 3 to 6 months for what we call the long lead magazines, which there aren't many left. Then there are the weeklies. I work with a team usually to see if there's an excerpt. And now I'm spending just as much time on all of the digital media. So everything from Huffington Post to Daily Beast to the Millions. I'm also pushing content to places like today.com, time.com, npr.org. So there is an entire digital column in everything I do. And then on the sort of last line, the newest thing is working with bloggers, Instagrammers, book influencers. I make all my own graphics for my books and work with the publishers. We use a program called Canva, which is free, and you can make some cool stuff like Bonnie.
Yes, I did this on Canva.
And you have to, the newest thing and, the easiest thing authors can do is swallow that nervousness and self-promote on your social media for your events, for your book coming out. It's acceptable. Don't feel bad about doing it, and do it a lot. I mean, that's how, we get people to come to events, discover new books, and you can't be shy. You have to act like me and just push it out there all the time.
Don't be afraid to be silly. And that's the thing that I've learned, like with the video that I did for the last book. And Amazon even let me upload it. I couldn't believe it. Let me upload it as an Amazon review. And so don't be afraid to be silly, because, it's fine. Just
let's end on that actually, which is, at the end of the day, if we're talking about books, we need to still be having fun. Reading is a pleasure, a privilege. It's one of the greatest things we have. I think our priorities, have hopefully become clear during the pandemic. And if we're not having a little bit of fun doing this, then why are we doing it? Because, there are other jobs that, like frontline workers and other people that have to be so serious all the time. And we get to work with books and words and authors. So yeah, do it with a smile, and someone will read your words. And you know what? I feel like you get one person. And to me, that's a great connection.
Great. Awesome. Give me a big smile so I can screenshot. Ready? Cheese. There we go.
Thank you
so much for joining the National Society of Newspaper Columnists. Our columnists who are also authors, I'm sure got so much great information from you. And I'm sure that I will be talking to you very soon, Laura.
Thanks everyone for attending tonight. Bonnie, thank you for inviting me. I'm really, truly honored to be talking to all of you journalists. I was so delighted when Bonnie asked me, and we will follow up and add, any other tidbits that we didn't get in tonight onto the handout. Again, I'm so thrilled and delighted and honored. So stay safe, everyone.
Good night, everyone.